Let's look at where empires actually start. This corporate boardroom felt colder than the Cleveland winter outside. Glass walls, glass table, a fragile place for fragile egos. The air felt sharp, ready to cut down anyone without power. Outside, snow drifted slowly past the glass. The rich investors sat there, wearing dark suits and arrogant expressions. Senior managers folded their hands, cowards waiting for the struggling guy to be sacrificed so they could survive. Up front stood Serafina Caldwell, just 28, the pampered new boss of a huge family company. Her brown hair fell loose around her perfect shoulders. Her expensive cream-colored dress and high heels made her look like the magazine covers she bought her way onto that year. She was beautiful, ruthless, and totally furious. A thick folder of customer complaints sat ready in front of her, as if a polished presentation could somehow hide their failures. At the far end stood the target, 29-year-old Elias Whitaker. A tall, broad guy with short dark hair wearing a face too tired to hide his daily grind. The collar of his cheap white shirt was badly frayed. He held a thicker folder, packed with photos showing cracked veneer from bad decisions above him. He had comparison charts tracking 2 different ruined oak shipments, and a desperate rescue plan he stayed up 3 nights building. Serafina never even offered him a seat. Let's watch this together. Elias simply started with the hard truth. The shipment failed because their new cheap timber was warping in the freezing supply chain routes. A corporate contractor was cutting protective foam in half just to save time. The backup freight route added 2 totally useless transfer points. He brought hard proof for everything. He added very quietly, built a list of fixes that cost less than the cash they were already burning. But Serafina brutally cut him off before his 3rd sentence. She snapped that she did not need solutions. She wanted accountability. Rich investors do not pay for excuses. Holding up the complaints, she asked the room how a broken warehouse manager, who ran off at 5 to get his kid, could ever survive a massive national rollout. Not one single manager dared to speak. A tiny noise at the doorway made every single head turn. Little Louisa Whittaker stood right in the gap of the door. 6 years old, sharing his brown eyes, clutching a beaten-up plush rabbit tight against her chest. School let out early. The front desk had no clue what else to do with her. The little girl stood there, totally frozen, staring at her dad down at the far end of that cold table. Serafina saw her, and instead of finding mercy, she just sharpened. Some men, she announced, were always getting dragged down by their messy personal lives. Some men could never carry a real corporate load. She stared down at the man she was discarding. "You are finished, Elias." The room froze, but you and I know abandonment builds hunger. He stayed quiet, watching the plush toy slip from his little girl's arms. Picture this. He walked the length of that conference table without any rush. He knelt down, dusted off the toy rabbit, and placed it gently right back into Louisa's little hands. He never glanced at Serafina again. The CEO thought she had broken him. She had only unleashed him. 3 years before this exact morning, Elias buried his wife. Her name was Hannah, and her fragile heart had quietly surrendered after a brutal illness that doctors kept renaming but could never actually stop. When she passed, Louisa was 3. After that, Elias watched his entire world shrink down to one priority. His mornings started before dawn. Nights ended only after dishes were clean, and Louisa finally stopped asking why her mom was not coming home. He never mentioned this grief at work. Caldwell Italia paid him to run their warehouse, not to mourn. So he became a machine of routine, braiding Louisa's hair himself, clumsily at first, then getting much better. He dropped her at school, heading to the warehouse, hitting his desk long before any other corporate manager showed up. He clocked out exactly on time whenever he lacked a babysitter. His official title was warehouse manager. Stick with me here. His true value was something those arrogant executives never saw. Elias knew which oak survived muggy transit runs through Pittsburgh, and which wood splintered crossing Lake Erie in freezing February. He knew exactly which packing crew skipped corner protectors whenever the main dispatcher turned their back. He knew which freight carrier always ran late on the western route. He knew which carpenter could fix a busted bed frame in 11 minutes flat. For years, this brand kept its prestige only because abandoned men like Elias quietly fixed every disaster those wealthy investors never noticed. A massive Pittsburgh hotel deal nearly died when 40 desks arrived totally scratched. Elias stayed up all night with 3 workers, sanding and refinishing every surface by hand. That hotel manager sent a glowing thank you letter that named nobody, just praising the corporate brand. When a cheap lacquer bubbled in dry heat, he suggested a much stronger finish. His brilliant proposal was simply filed away and totally ignored. So he quietly isolated those risky shipments and forced an extra round of inspections, covering that extra labor completely himself. That lacquer disaster never even reached a customer. None of that hustle made the quarterly reports, and Serafina remained totally blind. What Elias possessed was an old-fashioned, relentless kind of competence. He understood completely that physical products never lie. A cheap hinge stays broken, no matter how beautiful the marketing brochure looks on paper. You and I both know the truth. Abandoned men like him are never granted the privilege of losing their temper. His deep patience was not weakness. It was the raw discipline of a struggling father who could not afford to quit. Serafina Caldwell was not stupid. On paper, she was the smartest CEO Caldwell Atelier ever hired. Holding an advanced industrial design degree, she pitched flawlessly to wealthy angel investors. And she possessed an absolute gift for staging a boardroom before any meeting started. She inherited the entire company 2 years earlier, right after her father passed. You and I know the story. The founder's heart finally failed. He couldn't spend those long, grueling hours standing on the workshop floor anymore. His daughter Serafina inherited a company built on what he called boring virtues. Solid wood, reliable joints, lifetime hinges. The old man walked the floor daily, knowing every single craftsman's name. He tested every drawer slide with his own 2 hands. He once warned young Serafina about the absolute worst mistake a furniture brand could make. Never outgrow your own loyal carpenters. She memorized the words, but she never truly grasped their deeper meaning. Taking over the executive suite, she looked down and saw a business focused on entirely the wrong details. To her, the brand felt ancient. The catalog was drowning in beige. Serafina demanded Caldwell Atelier be mentioned, right alongside elite boutique design houses in New York and Milan. She craved glossy magazine covers, lavish spreads, and massive profit margins to match her shiny vision. During her first 18 months in charge, she made plenty of sweeping changes. On paper, inside that pristine conference room, her choices looked flawless. She forced a rebrand and poached a creative director from high fashion. She launched a glossy new product line targeting luxury boutique hotels. Investor pitches moved out of the dusty showroom and into a sleek downtown gallery. The industry trade press adored her. Here is the trap. From the 18th floor, she couldn't see her progress required, slashing the unglamorous, human parts of the company that didn't photograph well. The veteran quality inspector became nothing more than a useless relic. The old freight contract, just another inefficiency. That abandoned East Side warehouse was just a tax write-off waiting to happen. She judged human beings like product lines, favoring anyone holding a slick, polished pitch deck. She quietly resented anyone who dared leave a meeting early to pick up their kids. To her, a worker who couldn't stick around until 8 in the evening had already betrayed the company's grand vision. Elias Whitaker was exactly who she discarded. He didn't pitch, he never hosted dinners. He ignored every single invite to her lavish corporate holiday parties. He answered her messages after midnight, then logged out precisely at 5 the very next afternoon. To Serafina, that daily routine reeked of a complete lack of ambition. For Elias, it was just the survival architecture of a hungry single father. Beneath her icy confidence hid a terrifying fear that she could never match her father's legend. Running from that fear, she pushed harder and spoke sharper, trusting her own blind instincts, even in arenas where she had absolutely no experience. The massive contract bid that changed everything finally landed in early autumn. A major national hotel brand, North Star Hospitality, was actively renovating over 40 properties scattered across the Midwest and the East Coast. They desperately needed one exclusive furniture partner for the massive rollout. The winner would secure the single biggest order in Caldwell Atelier's modern history, easily anchoring the entire business for the next decade. Let's see her next move. Serafina greeted this opportunity like a ruthless chess player. She promised her corporate board a presentation to redefine the entire industry. To pull it off, she made 4 massive decisions in 1 week. She dumped their trusted hardwood supplier for a cheap Carolina mill, bragging about an 18% savings. She gutted the quality inspection team by a massive 2/3. She outsourced a huge chunk of their packing and handed crating to a regional firm who underbid her own loyal crew. Finally, she listed the East Side warehouse, the gritty workhorse her father bought 30 years ago, treating it like just another useless asset. On her shiny slide deck, every single number looked perfect. Costs fell, margins spiked, the corporate board loved it. The investors eagerly leaned in. But here is what you and I know: Elias saw the cracks first. That cheap oak warped in just 2 days inside a climate-controlled truck. The new hinges gave out after 120 simple uses. The budget lacquer scratched the second, a luggage cart even brushed it. That outsourced packing crew used 3 layers of foam instead of 5. The new freight routes pushed cargo through freezing night terminals that suddenly thawed by day. A silent, deadly bath of condensation for any wooden product. Elias was not fighting the change. He saw the reality. He drafted a plan. The kind of careful plan you write when you know you will be shut out. He listed every single failure step by step. He suggested keeping a few veteran inspectors on the most critical production lines. He even pushed to revive that abandoned East warehouse as a final checkpoint for unpacking major shipments, fully inspected and safely repacked before ever leaving Cleveland. He wanted to build a tougher product line for the everyday mid-market. The very customers Caldwell Elias was throwing away. That plan landed right with Carter Blake, senior director, reporting directly to Serafina. Carter was the guy who personally pushed that cheap new supplier deal. And his massive quarter bonus was tied directly to the very savings Serafina was feeding to the board. He read just enough of Elias's words to feel totally threatened. Then he fired off a quick memo to Serafina, starting with one fatal sentence. Warehouse leadership is fighting our strategy and wants to stay in the past. Serafina never read past that single opening line. She didn't bother calling Elias to hear out his side. She never stepped foot in his warehouse. You and I know this mistake. She trusted the suit over the man actually building things. The first big shipment of sample units went out to North Star's prototype hotel that early November. By the second week of the month, the hotel manager photographed every glaring flaw and fired it back to Cleveland. A wooden cabinet door hung half an inch off center. A new nightstand showed a cracking joint on the leg. A bed frame groaned under just 30 pounds of weight. And a pristine desk surface had a deep, ugly scratch running corner to corner. You and I begin with an email Serafina read twice. If Caldwell Italia cannot explain these defects in writing within 5 business days, our committee won't advance your firm to the final investment round. For the first time all year, she lost her cool. She didn't let the investors see her panic, though. Instead, she unleashed it during a defect review with her heads of operations, supply, and Carter Blake. Carter spent all weekend rehearsing his exact cowardly excuse. The defects, he told the room, were not a supply problem. They were a warehouse issue. In short, the problem was Elias Whitaker. They dragged Elias in at 10 in the morning. He arrived carrying a much thicker folder than Carter held. He brought wood swatches and cold transit comparison data for the oak, plus a fully time-stamped printout of his original ignored proposal. He barely slept at all. He walked his daughter Louisa to school just like always, telling her, when she asked if he was scared, that he felt way more nervous on her first kindergarten day. You and I know this meeting wasn't going his way, because his fate was sealed before he even walked in. Elias spoke calmly. He refused to blame Carter. He didn't blame Serafina either. He just walked them through the data. He simply explained that their product would never lie to a customer. If the joinery is weak, the joinery is going to fail. If the lacquer is wrong, the lacquer is going to peel. No slick marketing language can hide those hard facts. Serafina took that brutal truth as a personal attack. She felt the board representative staring right at her, and she felt immense pressure to deliver a harsh verdict for her audience. Then the door opened slightly. Louisa stood there, the way kids do when the receptionist runs out of options. The little girl held her stuffed rabbit. She didn't step inside, she just stared at her dad. Serafina spotted her, and rather than softening, she pivoted straight into cold corporate theater. There it is again, she snapped. Every difficult company conversation seems to get interrupted by Elias Whitaker's messy personal life. This startup cannot afford a leader at any level who treats work as something squeezed in around school pickups. Elias didn't answer her, he easily could have. But his daughter was watching, and a 6-year-old doesn't need to learn her father is a man who can be publicly humiliated. So Serafina filled the dead silence, rising to her feet. She let the brutal words land slowly. "You're finished, Elias." Nobody stopped her. Carter just stared at his notepad. 2 operations managers stared blankly down at the boardroom table. Elias closed his folder, crossed the long conference room, and knelt right in front of Louisa. He took the dangling toy rabbit from her hand and pressed it gently against her chest. He led her away quietly, but as you and I know, the abandoned build unstoppable things. Let's step onto Cleveland's autumn streets, gray like wet iron. Elias gripped the wheel tight, fighting the heavy silence pressing down from his daughter in the back seat. Louisa held her, stuffed rabbit close, watching city buildings slide away. Their small apartment felt warm, maybe a bit too bright. He hung her coat up and boiled water for simple pasta. He sliced the tomatoes perfectly into little half-moons. 2 quiet plates placed on the dinner table. She took 3 small bites, then slowly set her fork down. "Dad," she asked. He looked over. "Are you really finished?" Looking back later, no boardroom failure or harsh investor question. No public humiliation ever cut him as deeply as that one sentence from his 6-year-old girl. He swallowed hard. The only thing worse than hearing her question was giving a weak, shaky answer. He walked around the table, kneeling down so he could look right into her eyes. He didn't say a single bad word about Serafina. He kept quiet about the corrupt corporate company, too. He just told her, "No. Sweetheart, I'm not finished. I just got pushed out of a place that stopped seeing what I was worth." She tilted her little head. "So what are you going to do?" He stared at that worn rabbit. It had belonged to her mother once. Hannah used to carry it through the hospital to mark Louisa's bassinet. The soft fabric was wearing dangerously thin, and one floppy ear had already been sewn back twice. "I don't know yet," he said, "but your mom used to tell me something. She used to say, I had a habit of seeing things that still worked in the stuff other people threw away. I'm going to start with that." Louisa thought quietly about that for a while. Then she finished her dinner. Once she slept, Elias sat with that business proposal his old boss had arrogantly ignored. You and I know this look, the slow page turns of a man done asking for permission. A man who is finally looking to take action. He paused on the section detailing an old East Side warehouse. He knew that exact building. His old firm used it as a backup real estate facility for nearly 30 years. The roof leaked horribly right above the main loading dock. The electrical wiring needed an overhaul. The north side brick wall had been sinking for years, but Elias saw its deeply resilient bones. The base concrete pad was incredibly thick and level. The massive ceiling beams were pure, solid old steel. Those truck bays opened onto a road hitting the interstate in under 10 minutes flat. The surrounding city blocks were absolutely packed with discarded craftsmen who used to build for Caldwell Atelier. Just like Elias, the corporate world wrote that warehouse off as too broken to compete. It looked tired, it seemed completely unimportant. But we know the truth. Under that dust lay a hunger to build something unstoppable. You and I know real hunger sparks at 1 a.m. He didn't need to beg for his job back at Caldwell Atelier. He just needed to salvage what those corporate executives had blindly cast aside. He grabbed a blank piece of paper and clicked his pen open. He wrote 2 bold words up top, the exact way a discarded man starts building an unstoppable empire he intends to finish. Whittaker Built. Before the sun even rose, Elias drove to the gritty east side. He met Oliver Grant, a local real estate broker, by the rusted gate. Oliver was a tall, gray-suited guy in his 50s, pitching this abandoned property to blind, disinterested buyers for 3 long years. He was totally done pretending this forgotten husk held value. "I'll be straight with you," Oliver warned. 2 roofers bailed without bidding. The electrical wiring is completely original. The cracks on that north wall are definitely not just cosmetic. The office wing is pure mold, everybody abandoned it. Elias stayed silent. He just stared, a freezing yard, tall weeds choking the cracked pavement. The old Caldwell Atelier sign dangled awkwardly above the main loading dock. Inside, the heavy air just reeked of damp brick and stale oil. Two pigeons suddenly lifted off a steel beam and scrambled their way out through a shattered pane in the upper window. Elias paced the forgotten perimeter in absolute silence. He flattened his hand against the concrete floor, solid foundation not lifting. He squinted up toward the massive untouched ceiling trusses. Stepping into the loading bay, he calculated the ceiling height, door clearance, and truck turning radius. He grabbed his phone, mapping the exact distance to the nearest highway ramp. "What on earth are you planning for this?" Oliver asked. Elias weighed the question. Building exactly what the executives who discarded them had forgotten how to build. Here's the harsh truth we all face. Elias didn't have the cash that afternoon. He hawked his pickup truck. He emptied every penny from his savings. He pulled the very last of his wife's life insurance. The exact money he swore to save purely for his little girl's future. Then he buried his pride and drove straight to Henry Bell's house. Old Henry Bell was 68. A retired master carpenter who built Serafina's father's business for 20 years and wept quietly when the man died. Henry lived in a modest frame house featuring a dusty backyard workshop. He heard Elias's hungry startup plan over a cup of violently strong pitch-black coffee. When the pitch ended, Henry didn't offer any dramatic long-winded speech. He just opened a drawer, grabbed a folder holding his modest personal savings, and pushed it right across the table. He only said one thing. "You build the kind of furniture I'd trust my own grandkids on." That was the loan. The collateral was the abandoned man's name. Henry also passed him two specific phone numbers. Archie Nolan, a master frame specialist Serafina tossed out 6 months prior for corporate efficiency. And Bernie Wallace, a gritty packing veteran whose legendary methods once saved a whole shipment of antique cabinets through a brutal hailstorm. Elias called both discarded men the next morning. Both immediately said yes. You and I know why he got it. Within days, he bought the rejected property for absolute pennies. He brought his daughter, Louisa, to see the ruins that Saturday. Holding her hand, he guided her through the dark, empty aisles between the loading bays. She stared up at the massive steel beams, then right back at her dad. "Is this your new company, Dad?" Elias studied the shattered glass, the crumbling north wall, and those completely rusted door tracks. Then he tested the solid concrete floor. It didn't give an inch under his weight, a real foundation. "Not yet, honey," he answered her softly, "but it will be." Week 1 of this scrappy startup didn't look like much of a business. It was just 4 discarded men armed with rusty tools and cheap paint cans. Elias carved that massive abandoned warehouse into 3 rough workstations. The front area was set up strictly for inspecting and cutting the raw timber. The middle handled modular assembly. The back area, near the loading docks, managed packaging and shipping. He paid for the bare essentials and scrapped hard for absolutely everything else. He hunted down clearance oak from local lumber yards, shutting their doors for the winter. He rebuilt 3 used machines hauled in from a bankrupt shop in Akron, Ohio. Even the main assembly tables were hammered together entirely from scrap wood. He spent his nights drafting modular designs. Blueprints allowing a busy hotel maid to quickly swap out one damaged drawer face, one broken bed slat, or one scratched shelf without ever trashing the whole unit. Let's look at his deliberate strategy. He targeted every single client the elite corporate luxury world dismissed. Family-run motels and budget inns, affordable apartments, modest office spaces, and busy local medical clinics. College dormitories, places needing tough commercial furniture that could survive endless guests and tight budgets, run by operators who lacked a fancy design executive on retainer. 3 hardcore rules defined every single product shipping from that warehouse. First off, every frame remained modular, so any busted piece could be swapped out in minutes, not agonizing weeks. Second, protective packaging required over-engineered corners and braces. Exactly how Bernie believed every piece of craftsmanship deserved to travel on its first trip. Finally, the warranty line connected to a real human who built the product, never some outsourced call center just reading off a script. Elias enforced a strict 3-step inspection on every order. Archie cleared the wooden frames. Bernie checked the heavy packaging. Then Elias himself verified the load-bearing joints and replaceability. Nothing left those loading docks without all 3 ink signatures. Louisa stayed there after school daily. She finished her homework, sitting at the very first table Elias hammered together in that warehouse, a basic desk hiding in the corner. That wooden desk was not pretty, but honestly, it was completely indestructible. One day, Louisa taped a tiny note underneath that desk, hidden on the underside, where only someone checking the structural brace could ever spot it. In careful pencil letters, the little note simply read, "Dad built this." He never removed it. You see, for 6 grueling weeks, this rugged startup barely survived. Unstoppable hunger, 4 hours of sleep nightly. A hungry man rejects scraps. That afternoon, he turned away a client wanting cheap laminate. Elias refused to let his abandoned warehouse produce anything weak or low quality. For 6 weeks, the CEO who abandoned him stayed completely in the dark. To her, the discarded single father was just a closed chapter. She assumed the abandoned man took a quiet, dead-end warehouse job. The powerful executive had a corporate rollout and a demanding board to handle. You and I know arrogance blinds people. She never looked east. But his empty warehouse was breathing again with sawdust and rhythm. The scrubbed skylight sent bright shafts of afternoon sun cutting through the thick dust. 4 men worked inside. 2 were castaways recently fired by Caldwell Taylor itself. These discarded men started feeling a hunger they had not felt in years. They were finally building, not just shipping out. The very first customer to step inside the gritty new office of Whittaker Built was a determined woman named Vanessa Ray Reed. She ran an 18-room family motel right on the edge of Cleveland. Her busy summer season was only 3 short months away. Naturally, she had called Caldwell Taylor for her furniture first. A slick corporate rep politely informed her that her small motel order size was, in typical corporate speak, not aligned with their massive new strategic brand positioning. So Henry Bell quietly handed Vanessa that abandoned father's name. She drove to his forgotten warehouse on a windy Thursday, parked beside the startup's only worn-out delivery truck, and walked in expecting some slick salesman with a smooth pitch. Instead, she got a tall, rugged, tired father in a clean flannel shirt who presented 3 solid sample pieces. He explained his limits, named a very fair price, and swore on a hard delivery date. She respected that hunger. She placed the business order immediately. 18 sets of bedside tables, headboards, and small writing desks arrived on time and totally perfect. Every single piece held a small brass tag pinned inside the bottom drawer. Whittaker Built, Cleveland, Ohio. Vanessa phoned the unstoppable founder 3 weeks after installation. 2 careless guests smashed a nightstand corner right into a solid door frame. She simply asked for a quick replacement quote. He shipped a free replacement panel immediately because he engineered his products to be easily repaired from day one. She told a friend who managed a long-stay apartment building in Lakewood. That friend called Elias and bought 80 furniture pieces. Then he told a small Pennsylvania chain of 3 motor lodges. They flew Elias out to pitch them in a single meeting. He returned with a massive contract that doubled the size of his entire crew. Whittaker Built did not scale up by running flashy advertising. It grew through loyal word of mouth among outcasts no corporate ad could ever reach. Stick with me here. Caldwell's own financial books revealed his unstoppable rise before the clueless boardroom did. Bernice Howard, their veteran chief accountant, spotted a quiet shift in the receivables. Those flashy new corporate contracts looked great, but paid terribly late and brought heavy chargebacks. Meanwhile, those overlooked small business accounts, the forgotten regional chains who reliably cleared every single invoice on the 30th for years. The clients were thinning. Bernice flagged this loss 3 separate times in increasingly blunt corporate emails. But Serafina simply didn't have the time. Until a sales director warned her that 3 old mid-market B2B clients had jumped ship to a new East Side startup vendor named Whittaker Built. Serafina stopped dead. "Whittaker," she snapped. "Whittaker who?" "You and I know who it was." When she finally got the answer, she sat totally speechless. She searched the public business filings online and saw the address. The abandoned warehouse, the exact worthless property she had ordered sold. Then she read the names of this rising startup's hires. Henry Bell, Archie Nolan, Bernie Wallace. She scanned the glowing customer testimonials. These weren't pity reviews for a struggling charity case. They were proof of an unstoppable company eating her corporate cash flow alive. For the very first time since taking the CEO chair at Caldwell Atelier, Serafina finally felt the icy grip of real doubt cross her chest. In mid-March, the final North Star Hospitality selection meeting kicked off in Chicago. Only 2 B2B vendors survived to this round: Caldwell Atelier, the giant established brand, and Whittaker Built, the abandoned East Side Cleveland crew, added to the short list purely on instinct thanks to a tip from a long-stay operator out in Lakewood. Serafina arrived wearing dark red wool, hair tightly pulled back, with Carter Blake at her side. She had spent 2 solid weeks rehearsing the pitch. She confidently entered the Chicago boardroom, convinced that design language was the only thing that mattered. Let's see what happens next. Within 10 minutes, she found out they had totally different questions. The committee chair was a careful man in his 60s named David Reston. He had run hospitality chains for 40 years. He didn't care about brand language. He asked about ongoing maintenance costs. He wanted to know if vendors could replace one damaged desk surface without tossing the entire piece. He asked for the exact average defect rate on long-haul shipments. He questioned whether the bidder could guarantee a 48 to 72-hour replacement window during a rebrand season. Serafina answered in the only elite corporate language she knew. She spoke highly of heritage, premium craftsmanship, and creating an experience. Carter tried his best to fill in the operational gaps, but the numbers he produced were broad and clearly rounded. The committee just took notes without expression. During the second hour, the underdogs at Whittaker Built entered. Here is where hunger wins. Elias walked in wearing a navy blazer and white shirt. He brought his abandoned team, Archie, Bernie, and a sharp logistics manager named Hillary Stone, who had joined the startup 3 months earlier. They didn't bring a fancy corporate slide deck. They brought one single bedside table, one wall-mounted wooden desk, and a heavy little steel toolbox. Elias quietly placed that bedside table right onto the conference table in front of the committee. He didn't start with empty corporate buzzwords. Instead, he asked the hotel committee to picture 6 months after their grand reopening. Picture a housekeeper discovering a massive gouge across the front of a guest nightstand. He asked what their current commercial vendor needed to actually fix it. Then he opened his toolbox and removed 2 simple screws. He slid the ruined bedside table panel out, slipping a brand new one right into place. The entire replacement took him less than 2 minutes total. We watched the committee lean forward. He walked them through structural data, frame stress tests, hinge cycles, and lacquer durability ratings. He laid out a 3-year cost of ownership chart. He detailed his exact delivery commitments. He explained his rigorous inspection process. He never mentioned his massive competitor Caldwell Atelier. He simply didn't have to. The executives asked why his abandoned startup could handle a massive national business rollout. Elias answered them without raising his voice. Because we were built directly out of the mistakes the big corporate players refused to look at. We aren't just promising you faster delivery with a catchy slogan. We are promising an unstoppable system built to actually guarantee that faster delivery. He clearly mapped out the exact staged rollout he could commit to. 3 pilot hotel properties within the very first 90 days. 8 more locations over the next 6 months. Reaching full national capacity within 18 months. He gave them an out, an option to walk away from any phase that missed strict quality targets. You know what happens next. 2 hours later, the final decision arrived. Whittaker Built would handle the massive first wave. The giant Caldwell Atelier was politely thanked and swiftly dismissed. Her colleague Carter mumbled excuses about pricing, but Serafina stayed totally silent. She realized right then that the man she discarded hadn't won by being cheaper. He had won by building an unstoppable hunger around exactly the gritty details she always believed were totally beneath her. Out in the quiet Chicago hotel corridor, a space smelling faintly of cleaning fluid and fresh flowers, Serafina finally caught up to Elias. Her powerful investors remained behind her. The board was already pivoting to their next agenda item. For a long moment, it was just the 2 of them alone. Surprisingly, she didn't lead with anger. When she finally spoke, her voice dropped much lower than her usual sharp boardroom tone. "Did you build all of this?" she asked. "Just to prove me wrong." Elias took a slow breath. He could have mentioned the desperate night Louisa asked if his career was completely finished. He could have detailed the collapsing warehouse roof or that lifeline loan from Henry Bell. He didn't know, he simply said. "I built this so my daughter knows that one cruel sentence doesn't get to decide who her father is." Serafina didn't have a single answer ready. "You and I can see the shift." That silence was the longest she'd stood still all year. He spoke one final time, gently noting that her massive company had once commanded true respect. Because her father built it by walking the gritty workshop floor at 6 in the morning. He survived by knowing every builder and supplier by name. By giving small clients and massive buyers the exact same patience. Serafina, he explained, didn't weaken this enterprise because she was foolish. She weakened it because she had completely forgotten. Somewhere between those flashy magazine spreads and fancy gallery openings. That the actual work was the foundation, not the photograph. Serafina just listened, no interruptions. She didn't even raise her chin to argue back. When he finally turned to leave, she never called after him. She just watched his back as he headed down. That hallway, carrying a toolbox in one hand and that folder in the other. Then she stood there for several long minutes, staring at the floor. In the following months, Whittaker Built finished their first 3 North Star pilot projects way ahead of schedule. The board quickly approved the second wave. You see, the startup hired 12 more craftsmen, mostly folks who previously worked under Serafina's father. They completely rebuilt the main loading dock under a brand new roof. That abandoned East Side warehouse, lit nightly by towering sodium lamps over the paved lot, became a true fixture in the neighborhood. The brand new Whittaker Built sign above the bay glowed a crisp blue in the dark. Caldwell Atelier didn't completely collapse. Serafina, following a rather grueling meeting with her corporate board, scrapped the boutique-only line and rehired 2 senior inspectors she had previously fired. Carter Blake ended up leaving the enterprise within a year. Bernice Howard stepped up as chief operating officer. Slowly, the luxury brand began the hard process of remembering itself. One crisp autumn evening, Elias brought little Louisa to the bustling warehouse after school. The lights blared. Hillary Stone was working the radio, guiding a logistics driver near Toledo. Archie and Bernie were just finishing the final pieces of a custom manufacturing order for an Akron veteran's home. Louisa clutched her worn stuffed rabbit tightly, holding her father's hand with the other. She tilted her little head back, staring up at that glowing sign. "Dad," she asked softly after a while, "are you still sad she called you finished?" Elias just stared at the sign. He remembered that desperate night 3 years ago, writing the startup's name onto a blank sheet of paper at his tiny kitchen table. He thought about the ragged rabbit she was holding, about Hannah, and about every single grueling evening since. "No, sweetheart," he answered quietly. "Sometimes people only call you finished because they aren't close enough to see you starting over." A cold wind swept the lot. Those blue neon letters caught the final glare of the streetlight. Deep inside the shop, Bernie Wallace laughed at something Archie said. A massive delivery truck engine roared to life nearby. Serafina had once told this man his career was finished. But you and I know the truth. Some builders only truly begin when the rest of the world thinks they have absolutely nothing left to lose.